Okay, so let's talk about URLs and views and exactly what they do and how they work together. So I summarized this file briefly in the last video, but in our root file here inside of dev search, we have a file called urls.py. Now this file has a variable, which is a list, and this is in charge of the URL routing system of our entire application. So if we look at this, we have a bunch of paths here. So these are simply URL paths. And I did this in the last example. Basically, we can have a page for our home page. We can say something like project, and this is going to be to get the user projects. And with these, depending on where the user goes to the website, we are going to have a certain function associated. So we'll just say get home page, and that's going to be a function. And then we can say something like get projects. And basically any route we go to, we're going to execute a function that's going to probably get some data and then return some kind of page. So what I want to do is pull up a diagram. You don't have to write this out. We will start here in a second, but I want to show you something else here. So let's go ahead and check out facebook.com. Again, we're going to imagine that Facebook was built using Django. So what happens when somebody goes to facebook.com/about? So we have these paths. So these are the URL patterns. We find which path is associated inside of this variable right here or inside of this list. If we don't have one, it'll return back some error. Let's say somebody wants to go to about one or something like that. If it doesn't find it in here, we're going to throw an error. Once it does find a pattern that matches that, we are going to trigger a function. This function will probably get some kind of template. It'll probably query the database, pull back some data, and then the user will see this page returned inside of their browser. So check out this diagram, pay attention to what's going on as we go through this system here. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to build out some views here. So what I'm going to do is actually close these out here. And let's go ahead and create some functions that return some kind of data. So the first thing is we'll create a function for returning back some products. So we'll just say products, or not products, but projects. I've been building some e-commerce websites, so I've been confused with that, projects and products. So we create a function and we pass in a parameter called request. So that's a request object, like an HTTP request. Don't worry about the details of it, but that basically makes this a view. Now to return it, we need to return something back to the user. So in this case, let's go ahead and do from Django.http import HTTP response. So we're not going to return a page just yet. We just want to return back some basic HTTP response with some kind of message. So we'll just say here are our products. Okay, so here's a message, and all we need to do is create a path to trigger this. So we're going to use this imported path function. So in here, all I'm going to do is create a path here. And remember, this is a list, so add in a comma after, and we'll just say products / and that's it. So that's the route the user has to go to. Now, in order to actually return this function, we're simply going to add in the function, and that's it. Now, this function does actually take one more parameter. I'm referring to the path function, and we can actually give it a name. And we'll talk about what this does later, but let's name our URL parameter or that path here. So we'll just do projects, and there we go. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So let's go ahead and turn on our server. I'll open up my terminal, and we'll just go ahead and clear this. Control C here, CLS, sorry everyone. Okay, so let's just do python manage.py, make sure your virtual environment's on, and then we'll just do run server. Okay, so if I go to the page here, or the website, let's bring this into frame here. Let's go ahead and go to port 8000. Remember, I saved it. So at this point, because we added a URL parameter, we have no homepage. Don't worry about this. We can see the routes that are available. So let's go ahead and go to, not products, projects. I keep doing this. So let's see, projects like that. And I'm probably going to do that a few more times here. So we want to return back our projects. So let's just do / projects. Okay, there we go. We have a simple HTTP response. So it's not necessarily a template yet, but we're able to see something. So let's recap what happened. We went to the website. When we went to the domain, and then we went to / projects, we went and triggered that function. This function executed this response and returned that back to the user. So what if we want to have another page? So let's go ahead and copy this right here. And we'll just say this is a single project. So when we have a list of projects, we want to open up a project and learn about it. We want to read about this specific project. So in here, we'll just say here, or we'll just say single object here. So let's do single project. Okay, so we return back a single project. So for this, we're going to create another path. So the browser knows, or the website knows exactly what to do here. We're going to take out that S there. So this is an individual project, and we're going to use this function now. So we need to remove that S, and then the name is going to be like that. So we just took out the S, and that's going to execute a different function, and it's a different path. So this one's supposed to say single project. So let's go back to our website. So if we take out the S, here we go, single project. If we add in single projects, there we go. So the website is triggering this file here. When we open that up, it goes into this list, it finds a route that matches, takes one of these functions, and returns it. Now, before we continue on to the next step, I want to show you how to pass in some dynamic data into these projects, because typically when you go to a certain product page on a website, you're going to see something like products and then / and then some kind of ID or slug field or something like that. And that field or that URL parameter is typically used to request that project from the database or that product. So in this case, we're going to go to project, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell this URL inside of angle brackets. So go ahead, open and close it, add the / here. We are going to say, go ahead and give us a string value, and we're going to name the parameter. So we're going to call it PK for primary key. Now, the reason why we're using a string value is because long-term our IDs, which we're going to use to query the project, are going to be something called a UUID, which contain numbers and letters. But in theory, if you're only going to use a number, you can do ID or INT for integer or slug. So these three options will work. We're just going to say stir like that and just indicate that that's a string. Now, whatever value we put in here, we need to tell this function that we are looking for another parameter, and that's going to be received from the URL here. Let me just close this out. So I'm not closing out my terminal, I'm just minimizing it. So just make sure you don't close yours out. My server is still on. So remember, if I called this, again, I'm just going to use the example of cookie, then I would have to call it cookie in here. So whatever we call that parameter in here, name it in here. So we're using PK. Now, what's going to happen when we go to project without a parameter? Let's try that. So if we go here and we go to project, we're going to get back an error because it's saying, hey, we have a partial URL, but we need to pass something in here. So let's go ahead and pass in a 1. There we go. We have a single project, and we can pass in a 2, and that value is dynamic. So that means that that can be an ID or any other dynamic value. So just to give you an idea of what that might look like on a page later on, we could do something like this. We'll just go ahead and do a plus, create some space between it, and let's just pass in this primary key or whatever we pass into that URL. So PK will be thrown in here, and let's actually return it. So there we go, project 2, that's passed into that function. We can even say hello here. It doesn't matter at this point. And there we go. Let's just pass in some more parameters here. So we're able to pass in some parameters. Let's recap one more time. We have a function that gets triggered when one of these routes gets triggered. And then I showed you how to make a dynamic route and pass in options through the URLs. And I believe we can add in multiple parameters here. We're not going to do that right now, but that can be done. Now, we don't want to create our views inside of the same file as our URLs here. So we're going to have to separate a few things here. When our project gets big, there's cases where you can have up to 30 functions, and these functions will have 20 lines of code. It could get that big. So we want to separate these. So what we're going to do is we're going to let our projects app take care of any view and URL that deals with projects. So let's go ahead and go inside of our projects app. So this is our app, projects, and let's go inside of views.py. So let's take these views and that import, copy that. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And then we're going to go into views.py, and this is the file that will store all of our views for projects here. Anything to do with projects, we're going to keep it inside of this views file. So any view associated with this. Now I'm going to save this. And what I want to do is also make sure that I don't have to add in a bunch of routes here, because that can also get messy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my projects app, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it urls.py. Remember, this is not necessary, but it's something that you should do. It makes it clean. So we have a new urls.py file inside of our projects app. So we have an app urls.py file and a root urls.py file. So inside of the apps urls.py file, let's go ahead and just save these. Let's go in here and let's make our first import. So we're going to do from Django.urls here, and we're just going to import path here. So we want to import that path function. And we also want to import the views so we can trigger them here. So I'll get to that in a second. So we need a URL patterns, and that's going to be a list. And remember, it looks virtually identical to this one. So we're just going to create another list inside of this one right here. Let's just reorganize these. So root and then app URLs. Now in here, let's go ahead and create these paths. So what I'm going to do is take these two paths here, we'll remove them, and we are going to paste them in here. So now any URL pattern that has anything to do with projects will be inside of this URLs file. Now I need to get these functions here because they're now inside of my views right here. So what we're going to do is we'll just do from dot. So from that same file path, import views. Now, because I'm importing it this way, we just need to add in views. So we're going into the views folder and we're getting this function. And then we're going to go ahead and do that for this one right here. So views.projects. Now that doesn't complete it. We have to do one last thing to actually connect this URL patterns list right here to this file. So at this point, Django does not know about these. So we have our URLs and our views set up, but let's try to visit this page. Doesn't work. It can't find it. So if we look at that, it's basically saying we only have admin and then a /. So that's the only file or the only pattern that it knows about. So we're going to use a function called include. So this include function will be imported. We're going to create a path here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in just an empty string, which basically means that that's going to be our root domain. So if we type in /admin, it's going to trigger this one. If we type in an empty string or just that domain, which is port 8000 at this point, later on it will be like devsearch.io or whatever we buy for the domain. So once we trigger that, we're going to use that include function, and we're basically saying go ahead and include all the URLs from, and then inside of a string we'll go into the projects file, and then we'll go into .urls. So we're basically telling it go into this folder and then go into this file. Basically what's happening here is now this URL patterns list right here has just added all of these. So it's going to send a user anytime a route matches this. It's going to go in here and it's going to look into these files now. So we are doing the same thing we did earlier. We just separated them into different files. So now if I go into this page, let's go ahead and refresh that. There we go. So our code was just cleaned up. We still have all of our URL paths, and that's our URLs and views. So I'll make sure that that diagram is linked up somewhere in the source code. Check that out, study it, but I hope that makes sense. In the next video, what we're going to do is actually build out some templates. I'll show you how to configure that, and we'll return real templates instead of just these simple HTTP responses. We want to use some HTML and CSS and make our pages look good. So we'll take care of that in the next video.